Welcome to the INSEAD Global AI Leader Series Part 2. I'm Theos Evgeniou, professor at INSEAD, and will be your host for this series. The series is co-organized with Digital at INSEAD, INSEAD Lifelong Learning, the AGI Club at INSEAD, and the Alumni Club INSEAD at AI. Before proceeding, let me remind you about the series. Next slide, please. The series has 8 events. We started on April 18, about 2 weeks ago, and we'll continue all the way to the beginning of July. Please remember to register for every event separately. And you go to the website of any of those events, like the one you just registered for today, and you can scroll and find the other events and register for them, each of them separately. The next event is coming up on May 29. Before we proceed, as always, the webinar etiquette. So you are all muted with videos off. Please use the Q&A tab to ask questions that we will also be voting up and down. So we select the ones that are most desirable. The webinar will be recorded. And if you have any technical issues, please email digital@insead.edu. Next slide, please. So today we visit Europe to discuss views from there about AI innovation and regulations. For this, we have another exceptional guest, Cedric O. Cedric is a founding advisor of Mistral AI, the well-known French generative AI startup that raised hundreds of millions within just months from being founded a few months ago, and is a key member in the global AI race. Cedric is also at the board of the consulting firm Artefact and has been involved in the French government before, also as a Minister of Digital for the country. He has also been involved in the development of France's national AI strategy. So clearly, with all this experience, both from the policy side and from the business side, Cedric is another excellent guest we have in the series. Cedric, welcome. We're all excited to have you here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot for having me today.
A pleasure. Before proceeding, I would like to have a poll for the audience and kind of get the big elephant in the room out of the room. When it comes to the success of Europe to compete on AI, are you optimistic, cautiously optimistic, hopeful but kind of pessimistic, or pessimistic? Let's see what the audience feels for Europe AI.
Shame, because I cannot vote, because it's
not yet,
noted that the host and the panelists can't vote.
So. But you will tell us what you think, and let's see how aligned you are. I'm very curious. I'm ready to take bets that you will say the same as the audience. That's my bet. And it will be more the lower side. So, Cedric, can you tell us what would you vote before we say the
Well, surprisingly enough, I would say that I'm optimistic. I don't know if it's surprisingly enough is the right term.
Let me stop you there to see the results first. So you are what did the audience say? We can do the results, Sandra? Well, it seems that basically 10% are optimistic, 40% are cautiously optimistic, and another 40% almost hopeful but kind of pessimistic, and 20% roughly pessimistic. So you are very optimistic, clearly, relative to the audience. So I think it would be great if you convince the audience that Europe has a future.
It would be interesting to know what the Europeans did vote for and what the Americans, what depending on the nationality or on the location, who voted for what would be interesting. I guess we can do that a little bit later, not on live. Okay. But
so if we can move slide, Sandra, we can have a discussion with Cedric. So why are you optimistic? Let's start from this. And why do you think people could be pessimistic? Maybe if you get this.
Yeah, I guess I'm optimistic for a few reasons. So I've been one of the guy who's been advocating for Europe to lean more toward innovation and to be a little bit more confident in itself, in its ability to, be part of the global race on AI. So I guess I can see why people are cautiously optimistic or a little bit hopeful, but not that optimistic. But I think there are two ways of seeing the current competition. There is the picture, but I think we are to some extent too often overlooking what happened over the past 15 years, and where we come from, where we are. It's obvious that there is a long way to go, and that Europe is definitely not. Europe is definitely lagging behind the US and China, just to mention them, in terms of digital, in terms of tech, and we are like way beyond them, like orders of magnitude beyond them. But we are also orders of magnitude ahead of what we were 15 years ago. Just to give you, for instance, some figures. I think I remember that like something like 15 years ago, if you compare the amount of money that is spent into European startups compared to what is the case in the US, it used to be 1 for 15 years ago. And something like 2022 or something like it was 1 for 3. So obviously there is still a gap, but the derivative of the curve is much better, I would say, in Europe than in the US. So the trend is pretty good. And there have been also a few things on the qualitative side that I think are making me pretty optimistic. I do believe that at the end of the day, innovation is following talent, because capital is following talent and success is following talent. And if you look at the trend on the talent market, it's not as, I mean, the trend is improving pretty fast, actually. It's historically, if I take France, we would train some of the best engineers in the world, especially in the AI domain, and we would export them to the US to feed the US growth and to feed the success of US companies. There are a lot of AI researchers that made the success of US or British companies. And today we are keeping them. I mean, the stories that we are seeing at Mistral, but not only Mistral, you can see other companies like Holistic, like Dust, and like Poolside, and a bunch of French AI companies, is something that you did not see something like only 10 years ago, only 5 years ago. Those people would have gone to the US. Those people would have been creating startups in the US. So obviously the task is tough. The competition is fierce. And there is a vital question that is raised to Europe, is that does it want to shape its own future, or is it too pessimistic or not confident enough in itself in order to lead the fight? But when I'm looking back and looking at where we were like only 5 years ago and we are today, I think that there is a way to fight. There is room to fight, and that's why I to some extent I want to be optimistic. But yes, I think we can play the game. It's going to be difficult. Plus, okay, Europe has its own difficulties, but if you look at, for instance, the attractiveness of the US in terms of talent, I think it's less than it used to be compared to Europe's one, because of many things, because of like things that are directly related to tech, but also because of political issues like abortion, probable election of Donald Trump, things like that are like harming the attractiveness of the US. So I think in the global race, everybody has its own challenge to face, and Europe has a room to play now. It was not the case 10 years ago. I think I would have been much more pessimistic 10 years ago. But now I think we can play the game.
That's good to hear. You are focusing a lot on talent. And I must say, I mean, I've been myself in machine learning for, I don't know, almost 30 years now. And the French machine learning people are really amazing, top of the game for sure. They tend to be more on the theory side, a little bit on the engineering, less on the business. So on the theory, machine learning theory, I mean, mathematics, they are great mathematicians. Some of the most field medalists, I think, are in France, actually. Of course, the question is what kind of skills we need. Let's come to this later. And I also know you've been involved in the national AI strategy of France, and talent is a big factor here, and what you've done to attract talent back. We'll come back to this at the end of the discussion. I want to do a tour a little bit through business first, and then come to the national AI strategy and talent attraction, among others. Now, Mistral, I'll start from Mistral and then go to regulations, governance, and then national strategies. Mistral is a miracle for France, for Europe, for the world in some ways, right? So, I mean, the company started with like a couple of people, raised hundreds of millions. It is playing the race, the global race. You mentioned talent, and Mistral is a proof of talent, but AI requires also data and, most important maybe today, compute. Let me start from compute, because most of the money the generative AI builders, not users, but builders raise today go mostly to GPUs, right? Compute. I mean, that's why they raise hundreds of millions. They go directly to compute, more or less, and cloud. So question is, if the competition raises an order of magnitude, roughly, right? Maybe, let's say, a lot more compute money than Mistral, how can Mistral catch up with a competition that has like a lot more compute? And what's the strategy of Mistral relative to other companies? How do you think it's competing, and how is it positioning itself?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a question that, I mean, still is debated, and we will see what happens on the long term. What's true is that there are, the relation between compute and software is pretty intense, and the question on where will the value go, how will it be bundled or not, who are the players that are going to be able to emerge is a question that is on the table. I guess what Mistral thinks is that first we are maybe one of the most capital efficient company in the LLM space. So we have the money, and we think that we have the talent, so we will have the money to be able to make to be part of the competition. And I guess we think that we can stay independent, and that's why actually Guillaume, Timothée, and Arthur created the company. On the long term, the strategy, can you stay independent without having your own compute? Can you have access to GPUs and things like that is a real question. I would say on the supply side, as long as you have the money, I'm not that worrying on that part. I do think that, for instance, NVIDIA, for many reasons, NVIDIA has interest to foster competition. It's, by the way, why we see companies like CoreWeave emerge, companies like FluidStack emerge, companies like, I don't know, Lambda Lab emerge, because NVIDIA has some interest into fostering the competition and unlock the hyperscalers oligopoly. And so I think there is a room to play, not to mention the fact that I guess there will be a lot of scrutiny by regulators on, and especially antitrust regulators, on how this market is unfolding. So it's opening some opportunities for Mistral. But I guess there are a lot of question marks even on the medium term. The basic question being the one that I was mentioning at the beginning: will Mistral find the money to develop itself for the 2 to 3 years to come? And I think the answer is definitely yes. As long as you stay at the top of the LLMs in terms of science, in terms of efficiency, I think that it's going to be able. You have to be efficient, and that's fortunately one of Mistral specificities, that our model are more efficient than others. That we were able to develop tier 1 model with much less capital than others, and they are able, and that's part of the strategy, I would say.
Sounds very good. So it's compute and talent together, talent going to efficiency, of course, because
money. Compute is equal to money to some extent. Yeah,
absolutely. Money makes the work productive. Absolutely. So let's see whether shorter midterm is mostly talent, given you have enough compute for now. More midterm, long term, let's say 2-3 years from now, is going to be funding, of course, and money and resources and revenues going forward. So it sounds like you are.
I guess so. Sorry. Yeah. I guess there is also a question that is raised. I mean, which is the way the competition and the technology will evolve. Will it be a race for brute force, I would say? How long will it stay a race for brute force, or will we see smaller or more efficient on-premise model emerge? And that could reshape quite drastically the competition. And I think all those questions are open questions.
Right. So how will the market get kind of segment in a sense somehow, right?
Yeah.
So what models? I'm wondering whether there is any angle that has to do with geography. And I'm going a little bit back to Europe versus US, China, and other parts of the world, and also even geopolitics and sovereignty, right? We hear a lot about sovereignty, data sovereignty, compute sovereignty, language maybe, I don't know. Do you think this dimension plays into the AI competition today, both for the developers like Mistral and in general for the AI players, and also the users when it comes to sovereignty? Do they choose different?
Well, I guess. I have a few things that I want to say on that thing. So first, there are 2 questions within the question. I guess we have to assume that there is an ongoing decoupling between the US and China, and to some extent the Western world and China in terms of technology. I'm not saying that this is the way I would like the world to unfold, but this is basically what's unfolding today. And so I guess Chinese market and Western market is going to be split to some extent. It's a pity, but it's the way it's going to unfold. The question within the Western world is a good question. In this regard, I first want to say something on Mistral. So Mistral was created by especially three co-founders, Arthur Mensch, Guillaume Lampe, and Timothée Lacroix. There are three non-operational co-founders. I'm one of them that are bringing their experience, but it's mainly the adventure of Arthur, Timothée, and Guillaume. And as they always explain that, they created that because the first reason why they came out of DeepMind and out of Meta was not to create a European company. It was because they were unhappy and dissatisfied with the way technology was unfolding and openness of technology was unfolding. And I think what's very important is that the goal of Mistral is, obviously Mistral is a European company, or obviously it has a European roots, but the goal of Mistral is not to be the European champion. The goal of Mistral is to be a global champion based in Europe. And they basically want to push open source. They want to push open way. They want to push the democratization of the technology. And they basically want to be best of the world. We want to be the best company in LLM in the world based in Europe. But we don't want to be only the European champion. It's a logical consequences. And I think it's important to say that because the mission of Mistral is broader than Europe, and pushing custom models that can be adapted, customized, on-premise, and open source all over the world is something that is pretty important. On the sovereignty side, it's a good question. The current trends that we see unfolding are not very enthusiastic. There's going to be there is a lot at stake for the incoming American elections. I guess so far, the world companies are living in, companies like Mistral, but also our competitors like Meta, Google, is still not something that is quite national. They are still thinking about a global approach of technology. And I think it would be a very big problem, not only for European companies, to foster something that is like shrinking a little bit on the national and the patriotistic approach. We should not be naive, and there are things, and President Macron has been advocating for more European power. But I think there is a difference between a lockup in Europe, I would say, a lockdown in Europe, and like that is wanting to do something very patriotic, and saying that we want Europe to be more powerful. Actually, that I think everybody can assume that Europe needs to be more powerful from an economic and technological point of view. But I think at the end of the day, nobody would benefit from something that is less global, as you say.
Yeah, sovereignty can be not only from the point of view of the European countries, can be from other parts of the world, right? From Middle East, UAE, they're having their own AI innovations there, but Africa, Asia, of course, the whole world.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to play for companies. And
yeah, I guess one of the things that are at stake, and just to land on that, this is one of the debates that Mistral is having with its competitors like OpenAI and Anthropic, is the openness of technology. I think one of the main problems that we're having with LLMs, it's a proxy that is intermediating our relationship with the cultural domain, and it's a problem if it stays into the hand of a limited handful of companies, and I include Mistral into those companies. I'll take an example that I often take. If you ask to a French guy who invented aviation, he's going to answer Clément Abair, probably, if he knows the answer. And if you ask an American guy who invented aviation, he will answer the Wright brothers. Obviously, GPT-4 is answering the Wright brothers. To some extent, Mistral is, because it has been trained mostly on English language, is answering the Wright brothers, but it's also mentioning Clément Abair. And so why am I mentioning that is that there is a cultural substract in each of these models, which is not a problem if you want to order a train ticket, but which is a problem if you want to ask what should I think on the Middle East war, the problem in Middle East between Israel and the Hamas, if you ask, political or cultural question. And the problem is that if we imagine that tomorrow, in 5 years, 10 years from now, all our students, even very young students, will use those LLMs at school, it's not possible that the choice and cultural and democratic choice stays into the hand of the handful of companies. So it's going to be a problem for Africa, for Middle East, for France, for Finland, for all the countries. and also all the culture within those countries to be able to adapt their own technology, not obviously because of economic reasons, but mostly for cultural reasons. So I think there will be tensions if there is not some kind of democratization of the technology.
I really love the cultural aspect of it, and frankly, for me, it's like one of the people talk about all sorts of risks about AI. Some people exaggerate the risks. I think, and I don't know what you think about the risks. One of the major risks we have is how AI impacts the way we think about the world, which is a little like the example you gave in a bigger scale. And special versions of that is, of course, the election integrity-related risks. So I don't know if that's a topic we can, of course, also touch upon. But this AI helps us shapes the way we think, and that's very important now.
Basically, just to build on that, it's interesting enough to see why is Elon Musk choosing to launch Grok. Probably for economic reasons, but the biggest reason he's pushing forward is ChatGPT is woke, and I don't want someone woke to answer to my question. So he's doing that for cultural reason. To some extent, it's embodying the fight that we are seeing unfolding on AI and on LLMs those days.
So it's also values in some ways. I mean, when the EU AI Act proposal came out a few years ago, 2019 or so, I remember one of the entry paragraph was like, we want AI with European values, which to me sounds a bit like, do you really want AI with European values? Which takes me now to the question, and it happens today, as you know, President Xi is in Paris. Both of us are in Paris now, so we had like President Xi around. And I saw in the news an hour ago or so that there was some kind of discussion between President Xi and President Macron about global AI governance. So probably the topic was on the agenda. I don't know, obviously, what they discussed. I mean, you can share whatever information you have, of course. Given that global AI governance passes through some kind of harmonization and alignment of values at some extent, is there any hope for this? How can that possibly look? How can it?
Not at all. If I'm really straightforward, I think there is not any. I mean, the hope that we can see on the short to medium term, a real AI governance emerge, I think are very limited for two main reasons. The first reason is that there is too much at stake. And so I've been, as a minister, in those forums like hundreds of hours. I've been speaking that ethical principle, blah, blah, blah stuff, like for hours. We should have a human approach to technology. Like a lot of nice words, which brought about nothing at the end of the day. For two reasons. First, there is too much at stake. So each country, each continent is coming at the table with in the back of its head the fact that I just want to win that race. And there is a tension between that and the fact that there is no ability to strike a deal on those aspects. Because you can't strike a deal. First, it's very difficult, obviously, for obvious reasons, to strike a deal on harmonization with China and Russia and to trust that they will abide by the deal. But it's also impossible to strike a deal with the US too, for a very simple reason that there is no transpartisan room in the US Congress to strike an international deal that would limit the ability of the American technology. So for that reason, it's impossible to strike a global deal because, I mean, it's always possible to strike a deal at the European level because, for reasons that we may discuss a little bit later, as soon as you pronounce the name regulation, Europeans are rushing forward and they are just all excited and they think they will. But anyway, but the truth is that if we were really pragmatic, I mean, it's game theory. It's prisoner's dilemma. If you're cooperative and the other one, you don't have any you are not sure that the other one will be cooperative, then there is a problem. So that's why we will end up with like non-binding principle. I can bet we will end up with non-binding principle. But there is one thing that we can do, and I think it's heavily required. And I think that's what President Macron especially has in mind. It's check and balances. One of the main problems of AI today, and Feifei has been mentioning that especially, is that the amount of money that is available on the private side is so huge that there is a huge attraction of the best talent pool, of the compute power, of the technological know-how on the private side. And you have a handful of companies, including Mistral, that have a technological know-how that government, public research, independent research, NGOs can't make up for that. They even don't have the technical ability to check what's happening on those models, to assess those models, because basically I think you will need a lot of compute to have models checking models and things like that. So maybe we cannot frame the regulation and build hard rules, but the first step would be to fund and to massively fund independent research, NGOs, public research, for that external check and balances to be able to balance the power of private companies. And this is, and to create networks of research between the US, Europe, maybe China, in order to have those external people that can check what private companies are doing. To some extent, when we ended up with the Paris agreement on climate change, it was on the basis of an independent research that was led by IPCC that paved the way for a consensus on what we should do, because we knew what was the problem and there were consensus on the problem. Today, the ability of building that consensus and of checking what those private companies are doing will be more and more limited if we don't fund independent research. And I think on that aspect, there can be something that can be done at the global level.
Very interesting. So AI governance at the global level, thin chances, but somehow checks and balances coming also from different organizations, which are independent organizations, something we can all agree upon and build slowly. Now, you mentioned Europe, and you said we can agree among ourselves in Europe. And we all remember back in, November, October, something like this. We were all reading every day in the news. One day there is agreement about the AI Act. The other day there is agreement about the AI Act. And there was a drama. And I suspect you have something to say about the drama. I'm curious, first of all, what was the drama back then in the fall? And what was like the sticky points? I mean, we hear about the open source foundation models. These are the last things that were added to the AI Act, a year or so ago or so. Can you tell us a bit more about the drama and the kind of different positions and how we end up where we ended up and whether that's kind of makes sense or what's your take?
Well, so there has been a lot of discussions, Mistral, but not only Mistral, actually the whole AI, European AI ecosystem was part of that. I guess the main point of disagreement was, should we regulate the technology or the usage of technology? And basically, there has been a trend, and actually at the end of the day, that's what the AI Act did, to regulate the technology itself. And there were a lot of people, including Mistral, but also a lot of other AI companies and AI researchers who were saying that it makes no sense to regulate technology in itself, because when you have a hammer, it could be used to kill someone or to punch on the nail, but you don't regulate the hammer. You regulate the fact that you're not allowed to hit someone with a hammer, and that was basically the biggest debate. There were like very important details also on the creativity right on our side, but I think basically that was the debate. I guess we landed on something that is not quite enthusiastic to put it that way, but that allows the European ecosystem to develop. So I think now we have to move forward. I get the main problem that personally I had with that approach was the mindset that was driving that approach. I do believe that one of the problems that Europe has to ask to itself is do we see ourselves as a power that is able to shape humanity and the future of humanity because we have people that are at the table shaping the technology, or do we see ourselves as people that are on the side of the table and trying to regulate technology, which I think is not enough if we want to shape our own future. And basically it's true on those things that it has also been true on genetics and a lot of questions. It's especially true in France, by the way, that fear has been driving a lot of reactions over the past decades, and I don't think that fear is a good feeling that should drive the way we behave. And I think, by the way, that fear we should be afraid of our own fear, and I'm always afraid of the European fears and European distrust in themselves. Well, and I think that was the thing that was the most itching me, is that there is that new technology that is coming. There are a lot of challenges. There is no wonder that we should do things, especially on the way it's used. But maybe we should just think that our prosperity has been built by people that were jumping on planes without knowing if they would land, that would create railways, that would create, that would work on radioactivity and die out of that. Like Marie Curie, and those people, because they took risks, because they were bullish, they created their own prosperity. I don't think that we will create prosperity by just being the referee of China and the US. And I think that was basically what was itching me. But let's be pragmatic. Now the tax is on the table. It's okay enough. It's a little bit burdensome and bureaucratic, but we can work with that, and we can create champion even with that. So let's focus. And what we see in Europe is pretty enthusiastic. Not only Mistral, but Aleph Alpha, but Holistic those days, does all those players. So let's build champions now.
Yeah, great. Maybe these are the reasons some of the people in the audience were less optimistic because of the topics you covered, and also because Europe is seen very often as rushing for regulation, as you said. But at the same time, you need some of it, of course. What I personally like, and I'm not sure what you think about this, in the EU AI Act, the part that is my favorite is not the one that talks about what are the high risk, low risk, and what are the requirements and all that, but the part that has to do with about how the regulations will kind of govern, if you like, and how they will be revised, reviewed, changed. I find this interesting. I don't know if you have anything to share about what are good ways to kind of have regulations which are continuously, regulations are a learning, activity. So how to make sure we have the right processes for learning. Do you have anything to share about what are good learning processes and whether we got it right, at least on that side, for the EU AI Act?
Well, I don't have any hard lesson. What I know is that the timeline of democratic processes is not the timeline of technology. And so if you want a regulation to be future-proof, then you have to be able to adapt it along the way in an adequate set of time, I would say. I think the Commission, especially the DG Connect, is pretty aware of that, and they have been trying to design something that was adaptable enough in order to be future-proof. We've been having discussion with them, and I think they are asking themselves the right questions, obviously giving their own answers. But I guess they have two main challenges. The first one is, do they have the ability to attract the talent? Because even for regulation, it's a question of talent. To some extent, they have to be able to hire the same people that Mistral wants to hire if they want to be able to control Mistral. Will they succeed into that? I understand that they had a lot of people answering to their call with very qualified people, which is pretty interesting. And I think this is a good thing, honestly. And the second thing is that, will they be able to adapt the rules along the way according to the development of technology? It's not easy, but I think they are determined to do that. So let's hope that they will be able to do that.
Indeed. On the talent side, it's interesting whether we really want the talent to go to Brussels or go to Mistral, but that's a good question, right? So we need
both of them. I guess for many reasons, I'm biased in that point. I think we need people to go first to companies, but I guess I guess they could do both. And this is one of the questions. This is not the topic of today, but I think revolving doors is something that makes the US stronger than Europe. And I think it's not within the European culture. I'm biased saying that because I had stories on that. But I guess we want the best people to be able to work for Mistral and then spend 3 years for the commission, checking what not Mistral obviously would be biased, but other companies would do, and go elsewhere back to the private sector. They would be able to dedicate 3 years of their life. And we want the best people to work for the government, but if we want them to work for the government, we can't tell them that they will work forever for the government. So we should be thinking of how we manage revolving doors.
A very big topic you are touching, which is not only about AI, but it shows that the topic
on all domains.
On all domains.
Exactly. I was reading the Wall Street Journal a year ago, and I saw that, for instance, on the CHIPS Act, the Americans saw that the ability to build their their power on compute and hardware again was something that was vital to them. And they went to BlackRock and to all the chips makers to attract some of the best people in the chips industry to work for the government. Those people, they divided their salary by 10. It's okay, it's fair enough. You're always happy to give like 3 years of your time to your government and for the general interest. But you can't do that if it's forever. So, and I would dream for Europe to do the same. Take the best AI researchers, say, okay, we are going to build the best like infrastructure in order to be able to check all those models, but then you can go back to the industry. But if you don't promise them that they will be able to have a life afterwards, you won't have them.
Let's hope they manage this. I think the Brussels sent letters to the governments for some experts for the AI board or whatever it is from, I think deadline is next week or so. So hopefully they'll make some reasonable selections there. Question for you is about implementation. I was in Washington 2-3 weeks ago talking about the same topics. And one of the key debates over there was top-down versus kind of bottom-up self-regulation in a sense. And the argument for bottom-up instead of top-down was percentage of compliance. So, we may have regulations, but then if people don't comply, what's the point? And question is, what have we learned perhaps from other regulations like GDPR, and now we have also the DSA, which already in force for the online platforms and the AI Act coming in. What about the implementation side? It's all good, but you have to implement it, right, as you said. And talent is one of them. Maybe there are other things. Is there any lessons from the implementation of other similar regulations that we can draw from?
Well, I get the main takeaway I have for regulation, whatever it is a few things. The first thing is single regulation in Europe. I mean, don't do directives. Do like single regulation. Don't allow some country to play within the loopholes of regulation, and don't allow country to strengthen or loosen the regulation, because there are countries that strengthen or loosen the regulation. You want Europe to be a single market? Then do a single regulation. Single regulation, single regulator. So we should give the Commission as much power as we can. Sometimes the Commission itself that does not want that power, because it's putting them into huge like budget and political pressure. But this is the direction of history. It makes no sense that those are different people that apply the GDPR in France than in Ireland or in Greece. Makes no sense. It should be the same rules for everybody, whatever the strength of the rules. So this is the first thing. Second thing is pace of the adaptation. I mean, we designed the GDPR. Don't remember the year, but to be adapted like maybe every year or so. And I guess second is that there should be an asymmetrical obligation between startups and big companies, because they don't have the same ability. And that's basically one of the problems, I think, with a lot of European regulation. If you have to begin with, you have to start by hiring like 3 or 4 compliance people, then it's not a startup life. Well, that's basically the lessons.
Yeah, this last point is very important, because lots of people say regulation will strangle innovation and will actually create a disadvantage for smaller firms. However, this, it seems, if I understand correctly, can be overcome if you have an implementation which takes into account the size and the resources. So as you say, exactly, right? And maybe that's a solution around. I don't know what you think about managing this. Because with GDPR, there is some research that came out from MIT, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, that showed that actually GDPR ended up kind of benefiting the bigger tech for many reasons.
Let's be completely honest. GDPR has been a gift to big techs. So Europe, I can say that I'm not a minister anymore, so I can say that. I mean, we tend to think that GDPR is a wonderful example of how Europe can shape the world. Not at all. It's a big gift that we gave to big players, and we just shot a bullet in our sheer foot just by doing that. Because the only one that can take the legal and then can circumvent the law, look at what's happening with pop-ups and things like that, is the big players that have that overwhelming environment, and so the big tech. So we made a gift to big techs against European SMEs. We still, for political reason, we can't say that. I mean, but if I had those discussions with big tech executives, and I do believe that as long as we will be lying to ourselves on GDPR, then we can't, I mean, it's going to be difficult to make better regulation. The truth is, GDPR is a political success. It's an economical failure.
Good to hear this. I don't think it's a confession because it's not your fault, right? But at least we hear some clarity here, which is great, especially from somebody coming like you, somebody like you coming from hearing this. Quick question before we go to some yes/no fast questions. So, do you think? Sorry, maybe I'm looking here at some questions from the audience also. Do you think there is any difference between the regulatory frameworks? It's a question from. It's a vote for a number of people. You short the Q&A. How do you benchmark the regulatory framework among EU, China, and US in attracting AI companies? I think that's a relevant question for our chapter now, and then we switch topics.
I guess China is not an option anymore. I mean, if we are straightforward, what the US are doing, and the fact that as soon as you have Chinese business, it becomes very difficult to have American business, especially in technological domain. It's a pity, but when I'm looking, and I'm not talking about Mistral, but when I'm looking at all like other technological company, but for some exceptions, I mean, it's a pity, but China is not attractive anymore for foreign talents. I guess at least what happened in what we see in Europe is that Europe is more and more aware. It's a little bit late, but it's better later than never. Has been improving a lot of its competitiveness, and I guess at least for the tech talents, I would come back to talents more than to companies, because I think those talents are quite easy, are moving quite easily. It's only qualitative because it's always difficult to be quantitative. But when I'm looking at French talents or European talents and their will to go to the US to create a company or achieve themselves as researchers, it's not true in all domain of research, but at least in AI, there are a lot of more and more people staying for many reasons, because it's good enough environment now to create a startup. You have like you have Google Research Lab, Meta Research Lab, all the biggest companies of the world are here. Now you have a lot of European unicorns, so you have counterparts. You have more and more foreigners. I think we should have more foreigners, but you have more and more foreigners. Plus, there are political implications of recent happenings in the US. What happened on abortion? What happened on gun control? Homelessness in downtown San Francisco. So there has been a revival of San Francisco because of AI. But still, I think if you compare the attractivity of the US are still far ahead. Let's not mince words. But if you compare the attractivity of Europe like 5 years ago and now, I think it has completely been overhauled.
Very interesting. Going back to talent again. I'll come back to this in a second when we also talk about national AI strategy that you've been involved in, and we discussed about this the two of us before, as you remember, and talent was a big issue there. But before there, I have 5 yes/no questions for you. The first yes/no question is a poll for the audience. So I don't know, Sandra, if you hear me, but hopefully you're there. We have a second poll, yes/no question, as we talk about Europe, China, US. All right, second question. By 2040, Europe will have a major player in AI, similar to how the internet saw significant players emerging about 15 years ago after its inception. Remember, in the internet side, Europe didn't do so well, but the question is, will it do at least some big player, big European AI tech by 2040, yes or no? Let's see, first of all, actually this time, let's see what the audience says, and then maybe you react to this.
For those who vote no, they are voting against Mistral. I just mentioned that. I can take that personally.
Yes, sure, because Mistral is one of them, right? So, or maybe a variation of it. Okay, whenever the polls are ready, let's see what the people say. Yes, no. Will Europe get a big tech? Yes, no. Yes.
Oh.
So it looks like people are turning optimistic. We started more pessimistic. Now we're getting optimistic. Your talent argument and the geopolitical kind of complexities and lifestyles and all that seems to be making a difference, Cedric. Which is, I mean, it's a good thing. Because, I mean, as INSEAD, we want the globe to be strong. The globe is strong when all regions are strong, not only one or two. So it's great. I mean, of course, now today is Europe. Next time we talk about UAE. The other time we talk about China, by the way. So we'll cover the whole world. Now, national AI strategy, and then we'll go to the questions from the audience. So you've been involved in that, and France announced their publicized their national AI strategy, I think, what, 3-4 weeks ago or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. So that was the second one they did, right? The first one was like when you were a minister, which was back, what, 4 or 5 years ago?
2018. Just before I was appointed. I was advisor to the president at the time.
Okay, got it. So you've been involved in both, from what I understand, right? Can you share a bit, first of all, any highlights from this national AI strategy and any highlights that kind of compare this with the previous one, about what you learned from the previous one that you can fix in a sense this time?
So maybe I can begin with the previous one. And what was the main achievement of the previous web? So we did a lot of things at that time. It might sound ridiculous a little bit today, but the national strategy was 1.5 billion euro for 5 years, something like that. So it's very limited to even what Mistral is raising today. But at that time, it was pretty bullish to go down that road. And France was one of the only countries that did that. So we did a lot of things like fostering the number of PhDs, the number of students, and all of that worked pretty well. It's a little bit under the radar because it's not like a big government initiative and you fund like chairs and things like that on research. We tried to foster the adoption of AI in SMEs, which never works. We can back to that a little bit later, because I don't think it's up to the government to foster that. But if I'm 100% honest and I'm looking back to that strategy, what was the main point that we did? It's something that was not really planned at the beginning of the strategy, is that we struck agreement with Google, Meta, Uber, Samsung, DeepMind, a lot of them, for them to settle research labs in Paris.
Specifically,
and that was and hadn't we done that, there would be no Mistral today. I think it's useless. It's useful to stay a little bit on that. When we struck those deals, so that Meta would open Fair in Paris, for instance, I remember talking to a lot of French big CEOs who told me, you are completely crazy, guys, because those guys, they will come to France and they will steal our talent because they are able to pay them 2 times, 3 times as much as we do. What I told them is that it's true. They will attract some talent, but actually they will keep talent here that would otherwise go to the US or to London, because London was also, because of DeepMind, one of the main global players for AI. And that's actually what happened. Obviously, they raised a little bit the salaries of researchers in France, which is a good thing, but also they kept in France people that stayed in France. And hadn't we had those like research lab, DeepMind or Meta in Paris, then Guillaume, Timothée, and ourselves, the founder of Mistral, they would probably have gone to London or Palo Alto. They would have met their girlfriend there. They would have made baby there. They would have their life there. They would have created Mistral there. So it's important to mention that because there is one thing that has always been in the mind of Macron's team, and I'm not part of that anymore, but I think I can share that philosophy, is that if you want to build something global, something big, you have to build something global. You have to attract the best people of the world, the best researchers of the world, the best investors of the world, the best entrepreneurs of the world. If you just want to do something frank on the French community, then it's not going to be big. And it's quite often into the French mind that if you want to build something real, sovereign, then you have to build something 100% French. Does not work. Tried that, never worked. And basically, we would not have like all that AI spring in France if we would not have been striking that deal. I would not have imagined at that time that I would be part of another startup. But basically, I think that was the main takeaway. As for the latest, the last strategy, I think the strategy is trying to cope with 2 diverging tensions. The first one is that we have the talent, we can have more and we should attract more, but we have the talent. The market is okay. I mean, it should be strengthened, widened, and more single than it is today, but it's going to take time. We need more capital. We need more capital to fuel that talent. And we need more foreign capital and French capital. The US have been building their their strengths and their power on top of partly foreign talent and foreign capital, we have to do the same because we need money, wherever it comes from, because it's going to require heavy private and not public money, private money and private investment, and there are a lot of issues about that. But we have to be part of that race, otherwise we will be making tours of the Tour Eiffel, but we will have been giving up our sovereignty and our independence. And so we have to play that game by its rules, and power is money and money is power. So we need more money. The other tension that we're having is that at the same time, there are rising inequalities. There is a lot of people within the society that don't even understand what's happening, that don't even understand, that are afraid for many reasons, good or bad reasons, but not the question. And it's true that all within the Western world, there is a movement of rejection of technology. It's true in France, but it's also true in the UK. It was part of the Brexit, part of what's happening in the US with the rise of Donald Trump, extremes in all Europe. Technology has been making inequality rise. And there is a part of the French population that is rejecting the sheer notion of progress and AI. And so you have to cope with that. You can't just say they get accustomed and we'd be fine at the end of the day. No, we'll be electing the extreme right and the far right before we're fine, and they're going to kill the baby or break the toy. So you have to onboard more people than we do today.
So it's value creation and inequality. It seems that this technology, like many technologies, can actually exaggerate inequalities within a country, between companies, within an industry, across nations even. So you are saying we have to somehow make sure we don't only focus on value creation, but also on value distribution, maybe upskilling, maybe other kind of policies that can help the whole tide rise, basically. There are many questions in the audience. So let me go to the audience briefly, and then I'll come back to the closing question to you. So lots of questions. The most popular one, maybe not surprising, it's about what the heck is the story between Mistral and Microsoft? So the question exactly, just to frame it exactly, what does the partnership with Microsoft encompass, and will Mistral be really independent from US ecosystem? I don't know.
I think it's a good question, but I guess there was a lot of misunderstanding. What there are two things with Microsoft. First, Microsoft invested in Mistral 15 million, something like that. So you just have to bear in mind that we raised 500 million, and then Microsoft invested less than Salesforce or a lot of other companies. I will get back to that in investment. On the other hand, Microsoft is a reseller. We also are reselling via AWS. We are on Bedrock, and we are on Snowflakes and all those cloud providers. So our goal is to have our technology available everywhere. You can take that through our own API, deploy that on premise, but also we want to be an all cloud provider. So that was basically what we announced with Microsoft, and it's a good go to market. It's a good way for us to foster the go to market to be available on Microsoft. But we have exactly the same agreement with AWS. On the investment side, I think Mistral has a unique ability because it's the only independent tier one LLM provider. If you take the 5 best models, 5 best categories of model on the Western world, then you have Meta, you have DeepMind, you have obviously OpenAI, and then you have Anthropic, but Anthropic has been raising a lot of billions from AWS. So Mistral, to some extent, is the only one that has tier one model that is independent. So I think there are lots of players, including American tech players, but also a lot of big tech providers that wants Mistral to stay independent. It is a huge chance for us because we will be going on with striking deals with potential clients and people that want to partner with us because they don't want to give money to big techs. Even when you are a big American software or hardware company and you are not a big tech, you don't want to give big money to big tech. So if you have an independent player, then you will be giving money to it. And you have an interest into fostering the independence of that company. And I think that this is a huge opportunity for Mistral, provided that the company is providing best in class models. So this is the first prerequisite. I can say that because I have nothing to do with that. I'm not responsible at all, fortunately, for designing and shipping the model. But I guess there is room to play. Plus, I don't want to speak in their name, but Arthur, Guillaume, and Timothée left Meta and DeepMind to create their own company because they were not satisfied with the way technology was unfolding, and they wanted to create something that they would feel good with. It's not to sell the company like 1 year after to a big tech. But they are also partners. I mean, Microsoft, GCP, AWS, and all the cloud providers, including French ones. We're also having discussions with French ones. Are resellers, so we are going to go on working with them.
So you are, in a sense, independence and multi-sourcing from the clients. Eventually, the corporates that are using, generative AI tools are playing to Mistral's advantage in many ways. Are also playing to like having multiple players at the end, and not just a few big tech that dominate the world. Because the clients eventually also want to have like different countries, different providers, different models, and also go back.
Plus, we have that specificity that you can like download the weight if you are one of the customer, customize that, deploy that on premise, put that in your private instances. So it's one of the Mistral specificities that we don't share with others. So I think there is a room to play.
Quick question on this one, and maybe it goes a little bit to open source, which we didn't touch upon. I kind of navigate a little bit away from this because it's a very difficult one. We have 3 minutes. There are many questions in the audience, but I have two quick ones to react to both of them. Open source. Some people are freaking out. It creates all sorts of new risks, and who is accountable at the end of the day? How do you set accountability? If you can share something about your thoughts about the risks of open source versus not open source, and also accountability. And the second question to close with, going back to governments and regulations and Europe, which is a bit more top down, let's say, in a sense. What do you think, based on all the experience you've had, governments and Brussels also can best do to support AI innovation and adoption in Europe? These are two questions. We can take them.
Very, very quickly on the first thing. I mean, we could elaborate a lot more, but I think first, I mean, people in Mistral, especially the researchers and engineers, they don't believe in bioterror risk and all those risks. That we would see something that is subconscious, or I don't know, that could help you create in your bathroom the deadliest virus ever. They don't believe in that at all. So it's creating a lot of issues, especially on disinformation. We don't have time to develop that, but there are issues that we have to control, but not that big one, I would say. And so I think you are stuck between two risks. Do you prefer to have the technology that is controlled by a very limited handful of companies that decide on the cultural side of that? Or do you prefer to have something that is more democratized? I think the second one, we are definitely in favor of the second one.
But you said the dilemma.
Second thing on Europe, what should Europe do? We need more money. We need more money, and for that, there has been a proposal that was made by Enrico Letta in his latest report on deepening the single capital market in Europe. We definitely need that. We need a single capital market so we can raise much more money than we do today. Otherwise, I mean, we can develop Mistral and other European companies and find money. It's just that at the end of the day, if those companies are successful, it will benefit the American pension, the American pensioners, and the money will go back to the US. So we just have to make the choice that we want.
So to get the European AI to work, we need a European financial system that works in many ways.
Definitely, a single one, like for the market.
Absolutely. So it's a lot about, we have the talent. I mean, Europe has a talent. Compute, okay, there are different ways to play around this, but financing and talent together is what make the world go around in many ways. So if we were to close,
and on compute, just to finish on that, look at the cloud market. 2 out of the 3 main players, Google and Amazon, are not cloud providers. They are. It's a search engine and a supermarket, but they grew so big that at some point they had to master that core technology. And I think this is the way it will unfold. It will unfold the same way in Europe. So we need to have big software players. And those players, at some point, they will consider that mastering the cloud or the compute or the hardware, even the chip. Look at what Apple, Google, or Microsoft are doing on the chips. It's strategic for them. But they will have ability to invest much more than people that would start from scratch today.
Cedric, thanks very much. I can see why you're optimistic. I feel more optimistic after this myself. Hopefully, about the world, not only about Europe. Thank you very much. A pleasure having you here in the series. Looking forward to discussing more. And to the audience, thanks for being with us. Don't forget to register for the next events. As I mentioned, next one is UAE. Looking forward. Have a nice afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.